welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including one talking about how AI, OpenAI specifically, is getting a new threat, lots of new competition, how things may be changing in the game. A interesting one talking about how JD Vance may not be loved by the populace, but he's satisfying all the wants and needs of Donald Trump, and then also delving into some of the Giuliani cases that are going to bankrupt him towards the end of this year. But with all that said, we don't want to forget that we're also going to talk about our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, is OpenAI too big to fail? And I don't necessarily think that it's going to fail, but my question is it too big to fail? Is it already the leader in AI technology and it being bought up by Microsoft essentially and brought in-house? Is that going, or having a large investment from Microsoft? Sorry, you got to be very, very accurate there. Is that actually going to protect them, and are they going to be at such a scale that they can't come down? Throw your comments in the comment section down below. Love to hear everybody's opinions. But let's jump into our first article that comes from the Wall Street Journal. The headline reads, "The threat to OpenAI is growing." And for people who have not been keeping up with the AI space, of course, there are lots of different competitors out there. Then again, AI has been blooming, and then there's a little bit of contraction in the stock market more recently as some of the returns that are promised by AI hasn't necessarily been seen. Even with Anthropic, a really well built out model, some people are really questioning what's the inherent value here. OpenAI seems to have a lot of good things, DALL-E, whether it be ChatGPT, and yet it still seems to be a little bit of a party trick on the front end, though there have been some back-end plugins that lots of people use on their websites and in different key components of their companies that could very well provide lots of value. That's why they have business plans in the first place. But overall, we've seen a contraction in the market because all these extra companies that have been brought out that say they have inherent value brought by their new programs, their new AI technology, and it hasn't necessarily come to fruition yet. They haven't seen returns on this investment. They're kind of in a grow phase. But now the Wall Street Journal is kind of showing a little bit of an opposite side here, especially with some of the potential regulation that's coming down to California that we talked about last week on Friday. That is something that could very well hurt OpenAI if they stay within that state, and they seem to want to because that's where the Silicon Valley pipeline is. A lot of smart people who want to pursue those industries specifically are going to go down towards the Silicon Valley area. But what else is going on here? So we're going to read straight from the first paragraph. Quote, "Apple, NVIDIA, and Microsoft are in talks to invest in OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, at precisely the moment when it becomes apparent that the company will face tougher competition than ever in the burgeoning artificial intelligence market." So what else is going on here? Who are the other competitors? Well, we know that Mr. Marky Zuckerberg, Mr. Berg, is coming in with Llama. This is something they've been behind for a long time. They have their own Meta AI that goes across all of their different apps, whether it be WhatsApp. I don't necessarily know all of the infrastructure on WhatsApp. I know they have something going on in Instagram as well as in Facebook. So Mr. Zuckerberg's coming in and he's saying, no, we're going to disrupt this market. And guess what? We're also going to make all of our code open source, which means not only can they see everything going on, there's a little bit of transparency there, which is something OpenAI does not necessarily have, even though they do release a lot of their data. They don't release all of it, and that has been one contention from people like Elon Musk, who was an initial investor in OpenAI, who was a little bit hesitant when they started to really close things off. The name literally is OpenAI, and yet they seem to be a little bit more shadowy nowadays is probably the best way to put it. Shadowy AI? That sounds a little weird, and closed AI just doesn't sound right. But the point being that when you put the code, all of the different information, the training data, everything out there in the public, one, there's a lot of transparency, which is a selling point for some people to use Llama because they can see how their data might be being used, being stored, stuff like that. But also, you put that information out there for somebody else to use. If it's open source, then somebody else can come in and say, hey, I'm going to use the Llama 2 infrastructure and then build my own specific model. And that allows companies to not have to do a lot of the legwork in order to get into this initial internal market. So what happens when you're trying to build out an AI system? If you want to get to the end all be all, artificial general intelligence, you're going to have basically all the data in the world, if not more, and it's extremely complicated. We don't honestly know how we're going to get there, but the idea that OpenAI has is, okay, more data, more data, more data. That means more servers to hold the data, more NVIDIA processors in order to actually go through all the data. Basically, they're trying to build out a giant set of neurons that would be able to act like a brain and have receptors, and all the cables, lines, and infrastructure between them would be the signals firing between the different neurons within the brain. If you want to make a really basic analogy, it's not quite that simple, obviously, because a lot of this is done with code rather than just physical infrastructure. But the point being that the more data that you have, in theory, the more powerful, or the more data that you can analyze properly, the more powerful your AI can be. And that gives the people who are already into the front end, who have already done a lot of this breaking down, who have refined their models over time, they have access to a large set of information, they have a little bit of a head start. Now, with Llama, if things are open source, in theory, even though not everybody's going to have the infrastructure to do it, in theory, anybody can start running their own AI model. May not be as powerful as ChatGPT, but guess what? If you have really smart people who have come from that side of the tech sector, from the coding sector, they can keep on pushing the boundaries with this model that has been developed for them, essentially. They've been given the base tools, and guess what? That opens up the market for more competition. So here's the exact quote where the article goes into it at first. Quote, "At least one tech giant sees promise in the new crop of AI startups. Mark Zuckerberg, chief executive of Facebook's parent Meta Platforms, is positioning his company as a champion for the little guys, letting outside developers use Meta's cutting-edge AI model Llama free of charge. Google has also released an open source AI that's not nearly as capable as Meta's." So when you hear that, you're like, okay, so there are multiple other people who are sitting in the market and saying, guess what? We need to undercut this hegemony. And I would guess that if Facebook or Meta got there first, they might be a little bit more willing to close off their system. But they're sitting there saying, okay, there's somebody else who has an advantage. Microsoft's already heavily invested into this different a sector that, then again, they were already doing their own AI things, but they're heavily invested in this sector. They're propping up one of our biggest competitors on the AI front. Now you're seeing things like NVIDIA, Apple, because guess what? NVIDIA, they have to actually use some of the NVIDIA processors because the dedicated GPU is actually really good at processing information if you have a little bit of a workaround, which I found out in Life After Google. Go read that book. It's a very interesting one. It'll tell you lots of things you didn't know about how the internet infrastructure is working now and how it could change. But the point being that they're saying, okay, well, this is a huge buyer of our product. We should probably look at what the possible investment options are. And then you have a place like Apple, which is obviously using ChatGPT in the new integration in their new phones. We talked about this one before, because at the end of the day, we're going to have ChatGPT basically in all of our phones, and there's going to be an on-phone model that's able to process information, but if it can't handle it, it's going to outsource to ChatGPT. So with that sort of business partnership already happening, it makes sense to have a little bit of investment in the company that you are actually doing that with, so you could possibly have a little bit more control. You could argue, hey, these features need to be focused on because we have a 5% stake and we could plummet the price or something like that. And I'm saying that that would be stock manipulation, and it would be basically using their position in the company as blackmail, which they wouldn't do that in a legal sense. They wouldn't make it obvious, but they could still pretend that it's a threat that they're holding out there, or they could sell out their stake to somebody else if they don't necessarily get what they want from ChatGPT. So it's kind of like a bargaining chip, as well as possibly a good investment, because obviously ChatGPT has been on the front edge of this curve. But then Meta coming in and undercutting things, and Google doing the exact same thing. They're sitting there, okay, hey, all these big guys are getting in on the game. We need to make it as easy as possible for there to be lots of competition. One, so that the price stays very low. Two, so that there's basically not a hegemon within this one industry or a monopolist. And three, so that we can make sure that this is done in a responsible way. Because if in Facebook and Meta's theory of the case, if everything is siloed off, if all the information is just locked under one person, Sam Altman, or his board and the loyalists that they put on there after he was sent away. If that's all underneath him, he basically can control where the industry goes. And you may be saying, Alex, what does that mean? Well, one, if he thinks that a open source project is not worth the time, then he's not going to direct resources there. And guess what? If they're the only main player in the game that has the resources to actually research in certain directions and they want to apply their funds limited in a limited fashion, and he says, hey, no, open source ain't the way, we need to go this way, or maybe data surveillance or facial recognition, all these different things, they could basically control the way that the resources, the people, are used and what projects they're used on in order to develop AI in certain directions. So if you have a company like Meta, who has a lot of resources behind them already, builds an open source model and gets out to as many people as possible, then you're going to have a little bit of a cross incentive there, which is Sam Altman can't just say, oh, it's only what I want to do. It's, oh, we got to respond to this competitor who's making this. So we got to respond to this competitor who's making that. And they might stretch themselves thin as all these different companies come up, and they might have to be a little bit more, how should I say, they can't be as bashful with the way that they use their money. And then again, they could very well buy up a lot of these companies. That's what Google has done and Facebook has done. They've bought up, or Meta, excuse me, they've bought up a lot of these starter companies, and they've basically integrated them into their systems in order to, one, possibly knock out competition, but two, maybe it's a useful feature that has a little bit of cross connectivity between some of the products they offer or some of the software stuff that they offer. Like Endless Scroll was developed, for those of you who don't know what Endless Scroll is when you go on YouTube and you just keep reloading, or Instagram, and the videos just keep popping up. That was a technology that was, I believe it was developed within either Google or Meta, but either way, the technology quickly got around, and they've basically kept it siloed so that only they can really, and I say only they can really use it, anybody can use it. It's a simple program, but the point being that the algorithms that they use to actually make that infinite scroll better, they keep all that information in-house in order to make sure they can take advantage of your need to continuously, in my need, of course, to continuously scroll through information, constantly get that next dopamine hit of a new video that you haven't seen yet, or a new post that you haven't quite seen yet. And it's very, very fascinating the way that they've monopolized this industry, for sure. But it's also funny that they're taking the inverse approach here, saying, hey, we're actually behind on this one. We're not the leading edge. We're not the big dogs already that can buy everybody up. So we're going to foster competition. And like I said, if they were in the inverse position, they would want to lock out competition because they want to lock in their gains. They want to make sure that all the best AI developers come to them rather than some cutting edge small company that has a lot of promise, because they want to make sure they're developing as fast as possible. They don't lose talent. And that's what happens when you have a lot of different competitors out there as well who are doing noble things. So this is all very, very fascinating to me because, like I said, it's not so much that I do care about what ChatGPT does. I do want them to be responsible, and I think the mission of Meta is most definitely noble. I want to focus, I'm a little bit more cynical, and I just find it, like I said, very ironic. It's that these other big companies who have been monopolizing the industry and who have been coming in and buying, they literally have multiple suits on the books from the Justice Department for monopolistic tendencies, and they're saying, oh, no, hey, guys, we gotta look out for the little guy. We gotta put our information out there. And for everybody who says that open source is 100% noble, I love where your heart is. Let me ask you a simple question. Is AI a dangerous technology? Can it be used in the wrong way? And if you think no, look at how TikTok is addictive, and how, in theory, you could, and I'm not saying anybody is doing this, in theory, if a outside power controlled TikTok, they could very well change the type of content that is seen to be possibly revolutionary in nature, be a little bit more provocative in nature. And now, imagine that is an algorithm. It actually is trained AI, but imagine this is on a larger scale, generating content, generating photos, different content, also coming up with unique messages that resonate with certain people, all these sort of things. Imagine what happens when we start creating really good, amazing AIs here. We make them open source, and then immediately in China, immediately in India, immediately in Russia, immediately in Afghanistan, immediately in Europe, in England, immediately in South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, all these different countries get access to it. All the bad actors also get access to it. And these powerful models that have been developed, and a lot of time has been spent on making them here in the United States, they immediately fall into the hands of our adversaries. That's why it's an interesting conversation around the national security argument and AI, because people within government are saying AI is a really powerful tool. It could do everything I had mentioned before. There's hypothetical situations. And of course, we can never base things purely off of hypothetical situations. But that it would at least be their argument that this very well could happen, that it could fall into the hands of a bad actor who manipulates it and uses the resources, the time, the blood, sweat, and tears of American people in order to, or a company that is based within America that has made this product in order to undermine our country. And you can see where that national security concern at least comes from. That doesn't mean I think it's 100% legitimate. It doesn't mean I think we can just leave everything closed off, because under that same guise, they would basically say, oh, we're going to absorb these different companies into the U.S. government so that it's purely kept in-house. I mean, that logic goes to that absolute extreme, or at least some strands of it could, and I don't think that is necessary. But these are the things we have to have a discussion about. And I always think it's absolutely funny when Zuckerberg goes out and says, we're going to fight for the little guy, but also we're going to step on the government's toes here because we're basically giving away information to China. I mean, he's putting himself in a situation for OpenAI, Microsoft to literally come in and say, you can't just open source all this stuff because of all the national security arguments, because of the bad actor arguments that I talked about before, but also because the government could be sitting there like, oh, we don't even need you to lobby us on that one. Yeah, we need to stop this sort of thing. It's just funny to me. I think it's an interesting sort of situation that's going to come out here. I think at the end of the day, OpenAI is probably going to come out of it okay, especially with this new investment round that's going around. But that doesn't mean that there aren't more companies that are going to come up and challenge them directly. Imagine what a smaller company, maybe with 10th amount of the budget, but focusing on one particular thing can do. It just like OpenAI worked a long time on just DALL-E. They had their own DALL-E teams. They had their own ChatGPT teams. Imagine now a company that they're getting a little bit more bloated. They're probably not as diverse. They're not as lean. They're not as flexible, at least as a new startup is. Maybe this brings a little shakeup into the industry. I think it's going to be a fun one. Keep your eyes on it. Keep on watching. See what's happening. Even with Elon getting in there with Gronk and X, I haven't seen much news on that one, honestly. I think most people who pay for it are probably like, why did I? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the fun mode is, or the absurd mode, whatever he called it, is absolutely delightful. And I just don't know because I haven't paid for it. All right, so let's jump to our next article that comes from the New York Times. J.D. Vance's combative style confounds Democrats, but pleases Trump. And when I first went through this one, I was saying, that doesn't surprise me. At the end of the day, they wanted to describe him as a pit bull. That was what a lot of people on the right said, oh, he's going to be Trump's pit bull. And even the left started to adapt some of this language in order to describe him. I don't necessarily think that is accurate. I don't just think he's an attack dog. I would say that he is a knight, a noble knight who is trying to defend the values of the system and using his shield to block, and then at certain points use his sword to stab. And you may be thinking, well, why does it actually matter, the analogy we use? I think because a pit bull just mindlessly attacks, and obviously sometimes it can be commanded to attack, but I think the knight analogy works a little bit better because I think he truly believes in the more, how should I say, protectionist, the more Trump-era economics, the sort of populism mix. I think he truly believes with a little bit of nationalism. I think all of that, he truly believes it, and he's willing to fight for those values. So let's jump into how he's a little bit grating. Quote, the volume and velocity of attacks from Democrats stunned even Mr. Trump. He was unaware of the most incendiary remarks that opponents were rapidly unearthing from Mr. Vance's past, and the former president told allies that he was troubled by the idea that more comments would come to light as Democrats savaged his heir apparent as weird and anti-woman. A month later, polls show that the number of Americans who dislike Mr. Vance continues to grow, but Mr. Trump could not be happier. So we're sitting back and Trump's saying, okay, everybody's coming for him. Maybe not a good decision. And now he sees some of the media hits roll in. He sees what he's able to do out on the trail. His little gimmick where he went across when he was at the landing strip and he went across to Kamala's press pool, made a little bit of a joke about it. He's a very effective communicator. He's a pretty good troll from what I can see. Obviously, the things keep coming in and in. Oh, he's crack smart. I definitely think a lot of his policy proposals, they hit the base right where the base probably wants them, but I also think they don't necessarily speak to the moderate, which I think was the biggest problem with getting him on the ticket. But at the same time, he can kind of dip, dodge, and dive a little bit. That's the name of one of our segments, by the way. Stick around for that one later this week, but that's besides the point. He can dip, dive, and dodge a little bit better than other politicians, even if he fervently believes them. And, it would be better to have a moderate in that position. He can kind of get around some of these harder questions, like maybe a moderate wouldn't be as skilled or able to do if he chose someone like Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin's a smart guy as well. I'm not going to deny that. I don't know if he would be able to maneuver and get around some of these questions and redefine the conversation as well as J.D. Vance has, where he turned some pro-abortion arguments into immigration arguments. I mean, he's been able to do this on a routine basis, and I think that's why Mr. Trump really likes what he's doing there. But does that mean that he has the staying power? And you may be thinking, Alex, what do you mean by the staying power? I understand that Trump's not going to knock him off at this point, not going to happen. But does he have that extra little oomph, that extra little something? He can be a little bit charismatic, though he can be dry at other times. He has some of the right policy positions, but when they say heir apparent in here, I don't know if that is necessarily true. I don't think he has the razzle-dazzle, the razzle-zazzle. If you're looking for someone who's more razzle-zazzle than policy, and let's be clear, I'm not saying Matt Gaetz isn't policy, but I would say Matt Gaetz is very razzle-zazzle. If you could combine Matt Gaetz and J.D. Vance, there you go. You have an heir apparent. And I think some people would say, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, first off, she already gets too many negative hits out there. At least Matt Gaetz was the left kind of liked him because he was going after McCarthy there for a little bit, so his reputation isn't as completely ruined. But also Marjorie Taylor Greene says some goofy stuff. Let's just say that. She says some goofy stuff. She is not willing to get out there and she's not willing to get out there and moderate some of her stuff. She's just going and, telling it out how it is, unvarnished truth, which gets her in trouble sometimes. But if you mix some of the best qualities with a Gaetz and a Vance, I think you would have a true heir apparent. Someone who not only has some policy ideas, and let's be clear, I'm not saying Trump has all the best policy ideas, but who has the policy ideas and the razzle-dazzle, who can really solidify this movement. You would 100% have it with those two combined. I think either one alone does not truly take on the Trump era, though I think it will redefine the party overall, because we already have people like our Byron Donalds, like the Matt Gaetz I mentioned, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the J.D. Vances who have swung, obviously, and then some of the other Freedom Caucus members who they are willing to go along with the Trump swing because they see it as the future. But does that mean that it has the staying power without the big man? That's what you need in that next leader, the heir apparent. You need that little bit of something special that only Donald Trump seems to have. And that's why it's always interesting when the Republican Party seems to be betting so big on these sort of different individuals who are trying to take on some Trumpian messaging, and yet they're not able to pull it off quite like the man himself. And even then, he is not necessarily as popular as Kamala Harris is, at least right now. Obviously, the polls, we just did a whole episode about how you can't necessarily trust the polls, and how even if I was to trust them, they're all within margin of error, so it doesn't really change anything. But at least right now, based off the raw numbers, not looking at the margin of error, and obviously if you're discarding that, it's basically useless. But it shows Trump a little bit behind Kamala Harris. I see people who could beat Kamala Harris all by themselves, but I don't necessarily see them primed and ready right this second. I think Donald Trump right now is the only one that's truly able to capture that magic and is also ready to do so. So, with that said, I think we should probably move on to our next article, because while I wanted to go into why he grades Democrats so much, it's just because he's all the things I said. He's smart, he's intelligent, he's able to manipulate the message. He doesn't necessarily get bogged down, and he doesn't let the conversation be completely guided by whoever's asking him questions, but he can be a little bit over-aggressive sometimes, which has also gotten him into troubles. But speaking of over-aggressive, let's go to one of the favorite and most hated New York mayors Rudy Giuliani. This article comes from National Review. Georgia poll workers who won defamation case against Giuliani sue to seize assets, including Florida condo. So, what is going on here? Well, there's a little bit of a switcheroo. So one of the things that you'll find out very quickly is that he actually has two houses, or two condos, one that's worth about 5.6 in New York, one that's worth about 3.5 in Palm Beach, Florida. And he actually switched around which is his primary residence in order to protect the one in Palm Beach, Florida. And well, when you do that and you're obviously doing it for protective reasons, then people are going to come in and they're going to say, no. You did this after the lawsuit, even though they're actually appealing some of the lawsuits right now. Some of them have been thrown out because the judge is like, no, this is baloney. But all of this goes back to some things that Giuliani was saying after the 2020 election. So let's go into that. Quote, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss filed the new lawsuit on Friday, asking a federal court in New York to enforce last year's judgment, forcing Giuliani to turn over current property that he had disclosed. The requested items include his watch collection, sports memorabilia, and a 1980s Mercedes-Benz, among other things. The lawsuit marks the mother-daughter's duo latest push to collect the $148 million defamation judgment issued in December. So obviously this is not going well for Mr. Giuliani, but you may be asking what the original things that were going on here, because obviously I said that this is a reopening of a case that already had been concluded. So what was the initial one? Quote, he accused them of trying to steal the election from former President Donald Trump in 2020 while they were working the ballots in Fulton County. So obviously that's not going to go over very well. Some people are not going to like the fact that you are directly calling them out and saying, these people tried to steal the election and put that information out there and possibly ruin their careers, ruin their name. So this is something that has been brewing for quite some time. Like I said, there actually have been multiple repeals, and I do actually want to go into one specific thing here, which may be protecting Giuliani to some degree. Quote, days after the ruling, Giuliani filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy in an effort to protect his possessions. His bankruptcy claim was dismissed, though, by a New York judge last month, leaving him vulnerable to further legal actions taken by Freeman and Moss. In the bankruptcy case, Giuliani disclosed ownership of the personal items that the pair is seeking. And these women are coming for him. They're saying, no, you don't get to get away with this, okay? You came for our names. You slewed our names. We are going to make sure that we are given what we are due. And whether or not you think this is a baseless case, whether or not you think it's just people coming after Giuliani already while he's down on top of the other cases that he was a part of, especially the one in Fulton County, this is the epitome of legal warfare, and this is always a interesting conversation that's gone around during my lifetime, which is, hey, make sure you get a good lawyer. Make sure if anything happens, I can sue and get money. All this coming for the money, coming for the throat of other people rather than going for some sort of simple punishment and always trying to get money out of it. This is the new breed of American lawfare, and I think it is fascinating that after this has been a idea my entire life, it's kind of been an ongoing joke that, in America, we just sue over everything. Now we're starting to see lawfare used more and more, and more cases of it are being thrown out there, and people are more willing to call it out and give a certain name to it rather than just saying, these lawsuits are happening. They're willing, like I just said, to announce that it is lawfare. Now, am I saying that they're unjustly doing it because it's lawfare? No, it can still be lawfare and still be a just claim. Some people probably would have just blown it off. They said, it's defamation, no big deal. But these women are coming for the money. And hey, go for your bread. Even if it's wrong, go for your bread. If it is wrong, the courts will overturn it, as I think they probably will not, honestly, just because of the state of everything at this point. If I had said at the beginning, I would have said, the courts will probably overturn it. It seems like it's a little bit too much to say that this is a full-fledged defamation suit. But then again, the courts have repeatedly come down on the side of the women. So I think at this point, Giuliani is not going to come out well. But I feel bad for the man. Hopefully he gets to keep that Palm Beach condo so he can live it up on the beach, maybe go visit Mar-a-Lago down there, just go say hi to Mr. Donnie J and do some golf as Mr. Donald J doesn't make it into the presidency this next time. At least that's what the polls are showing. Maybe he will, and maybe he'll invite Giuliani over for a little Big Mac dinner. Who knows? Who knows? All right, so let's jump into our next article, and it's not actually just any article. It's our daily delight. This one comes from the Dodo. Employee finds someone adorable sleeping in linen store's bed display. And when I tell you that it's a puppy that just crawled its way into the linen store, it's just vibing, it's relaxing, it's a little bit shaky, it's a little bit scared, but it kind of calms down as it gets wrapped up in the linen. You got to go see this video. You got to go read this article because it's a fascinating one. It's adorable. It'll make you feel like there's a little bit of redemption, that people can actually be good people, which is what we always want to spread in this segment. And if you want to check out any of the other articles from today, they'll all be listed in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.